to everybody in TV land. This is Mike Hittner with Historic Point Basse Update. To my right, Tom Bramer. Welcome, Tom.
Good morning.
And we're a little different today. Another workday out at Historic Point Basse, so we're filming from the Trader's Cabin. And it's kind of nice. We've been showing you around the site these last couple months, and so today you'll get into the Trader's Cabin. Tom, you want to give them a little history on the Trader's Cabin, how we came about it and where we got it and how we put it up, that sort of thing?
Well, back in the, early 90s, I think it was?
92, something
92, something like that. Gene and Shirley Cussman, they lived up on the corner of Strawberry Lane and First Street, just before you go to the village of Buren. And they were going to tear down the old part of the house and then build a new kind of smaller retirement home there. And when they got into tearing it down, they found a log cabin in the center of their house.
So it had been originally a log cabin, and then somebody modernizing had built around it.
Right. They had put clapboard siding on the outside with some furring strip. And then on the inside, they filled in where the logs are. You can see behind me here. And then they put newspaper over that and then did wallpaper. And actually, that's kind of normal. We think of it, or I explain it this way. If we lived in a house with no electricity and no plumbing, people would think we're a little strange. If we lived there that way all the time.
Right.
Well, after the country was settled more, people didn't want to live in a log cabin anymore. That was for the lower class, the very poor, and those that just didn't have anything.
Right.
But if you could have clapboard siding, you could have wallpaper, who cares how thick the walls are?
Right.
It looks like a modern house.
And today, folks, it's the thing of the last 40 or 50 years with the aluminum siding and the vinyl siding.
Yep.
We do the same thing today. We cover an older house, and all of a sudden it looks pretty new and modern.
I'm doing it right now at my own house, yes, as a matter of fact. But anyway, that's what helped preserve it and also hid it, because Shirley had lived there for some time before and didn't realize that it was a log cabin. Well, anyway, they gave us about 30 days to get it down. It was over Easter of that year.
Well.
Snow and,
terrible weather.
And Tom Spranger had the lumber yard, and he lent us an old delivery truck. We had to keep gas in it, but we could use his delivery truck. And that's when we tore this apart. We numbered all the logs, took them down, and then brought them out to our parking lot and left them there, a year or two, I guess it was, wasn't it?
It's probably 4 years later before we put it back
Put it back up completely. We dug a crawl space and put cement block down so it was good and stable. We didn't want to do this more than once. And then we laid a stone foundation above that, and then used parts of an old log barn, or beams from an old barn, let's say it that way, to make the bottom, and then we went on with the logs from there. And it took us a good couple of years, 3 years maybe.
Our favorite thing to say, folks, is if you've ever heard us talk about a building project being in its completion, it'll be done in the fall, though we never say which year.
Right, and it took several years to do this one. There's some videotape of us putting some of the upper logs in on this side, and why somebody didn't get killed that day, I don't know.
Because they were just kind of balancing
big logs on a 2x4, and the guy was holding it
underneath,
so they could rearrange the ladders and the scaffolding to put it back up. I mean,
yeah.
I'm glad I was young and stupid in those days, because boy, I'd never do it now.
And you can see Jim Nichols behind the camera today, and you can see around here. Now, we had a big opening over here where the fireplace is, and that was a big opening. And then, of course, when Tom and I and Rob Nuri and a number of other people were looking at it, we said, well, that's the logical place to put the fireplace. We've got a big hole to fill up. We didn't have logs for that. There was just an opening there, and so that's probably wouldn't have been in that spot, been maybe more centrally located.
Actually, more about probably on the end.
On the end. Years ago, they had those propped up, those old fireplaces, so if you had a fire, you just take those props out, and the fireplace would fall off.
Exactly.
To save your cabin.
Exactly.
But we put it here in this whole. Bob J did the stonework, did a beautiful job. Actually probably a little fancy for our purpose here. And you can see we got a maple mantel up there. Now that came out of Robinson Park, almost like this year. We had that terrific sheer windstorm, and that day a lot of trees went down, pines and maples and some oaks and everything. And a guy brought his portable sawmill there,
right.
And he did the trees. We took all the pine, and I think we saved 1 or 2 pieces of maple, and we had a kind of an idea of what we were going to use it for.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's here today in the fireplace mantle. So
that's the first project when I moved to the new house. That was the first project I did in my workshop when I moved to the new house, and that's 25 years ago.
Right. So you can see the chinking is between the logs here. You can see it on both the inside and outside. It's a kind of it's a formula, not too different from cement, but not actually cement either.
Right.
And it fills in. I think this has been chinked twice by 2 Eagle projects, at least on the outside.
Correct. Two Eagle projects did it. The first time didn't last as well, and it wasn't the kids' fault. It was we didn't have the recipe exactly right. What you need to do is add some kind of a binder. And we didn't do that the first time. The second time, they actually sell, I'm going to tell them we cheat just once in a while.
It's a little
fiberglass, shredded fiberglass that you then mix into the concrete. And it's only like a handful in a big boat of concrete, but it keeps it from cracking.
It was a similar thing that the pioneers used, but they used horsehair.
They used horsehair, they used straw. A lot of times they even used moss, but then it had to be rechinked every year because it would dry out, fall out.
Right.
That just didn't work.
And so the first chinking on the outside probably lasted 7 or 8 years, and then it started to crack and fall out. And now this recent chinking that was done, probably 10 years now.
Oh yeah.
Has lasted real well because of that fiberglass fibers we put in with the mix.
Yep.
But you can take a little look around here. Is this pretty much what maybe a trader's cabin? You've maybe seen some in different places?
Just a little bigger.
A little bigger.
This was a log house, a 1.5-story log house. We actually made it just a 1-story.
Because of rotted logs.
Right. We needed the logs that were up, the long ones that were way up in the attic area, we needed those around the bottom. But we took that and converted it adaptive reuse. That's what the historians call it. So we did it that way. And it had wood floor when we got it, but probably a cabin for fur traders would have had a dirt floor, and it would have been built right on the ground because they were meant to stay 2-3 years, maybe a little more, not much. They weren't looking for the long range. They were here to exploit the furs and trade with the Native Americans and then move on.
We know, Tom, that the fur trade was pretty much done by the time the Wakeleys got.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wakeleys got here in 1837. The fur trade was probably done late 1700s, early 1800s.
Yeah, actually the late 17, early 1800s was pretty good, but it died really quickly after that.
Right.
By 1830, it was pretty well done, and by 1840, 47, John Jacob Astor finally just gave up on it. Even the western fur trade was pretty well done by then.
And of course the demand for the beaver hides was gone because it was a new fashion now and they weren't using that.
Silk hats, not fur hats,
You want to talk, Tom, a little bit about where we sited the cabin on the site as in relation to the other buildings and that sort of thing?
We wanted it to be separate. We wanted to tell the story of how the rest of the civilized world found out about Wisconsin from the fur trade and the very early explorers. So we pushed the building as far as we could away from the Wakely house. We didn't own near as much land in those days as we do now. And then we wanted to do it so that it was near the creek, the Wakely Creek, with its confluence with the Wisconsin River, which makes perfect sense for people traveling. And it's on higher ground above the river. Amabla Greno had a trading post. He's part of the de Langlade Greno family from over in the Fox Valley. He was one of the descendants of that. He had it
just down
the river.
Iron Creek.
Right, but before that, he was on the Yellow River near where it comes in by Babcock, somewhere down in that vicinity. I don't know exactly. It's probably under the Peaton Well now.
Yes.
But he was flooded out a couple of times down there before he moved up a little closer to where we are. So putting it on a high ground piece of ground near the river made perfect sense.
Yes. I think probably we were fortunate in the sense that we only had a small amount of land, because we would have probably maybe overthought it and then put it someplace where we shouldn't
Correct.
have.
Very good. Yeah.
And I think with the confluence of the Wakely Creek coming into the Wisconsin River just to the south of the building here, I think was a perfect spot, kind of almost mimicking maybe what Greenos had south of
Exactly.
us, about 5 miles or so.
Yeah.
And a nice part about it too was that, when I have children, when we have school groups come out here, Tom takes care of most of them at the cabin, and I do the house quite a bit, is when I talked to them about it, I said, the Wakeleys didn't build a house like this the first year they came here. They came in June, they had to raise their crops, they had to get ready for the winter, they had to get things going, otherwise they're going to starve to death. There's no place around here, there's no trading posts, no stores to go to or anything. And so what they more than likely did was build something about like this cabin for probably the first 2-3 years before they could get the time and effort to put together the house that we see today.
They would probably have been very, very glad to have one this good when they first came. Now, there could have been one here that somebody, because Whitney's had been here since in the 1830s,
Yes.
early 1830s, with their sawmill. Now, exactly where they lived and what happened, we don't know. They weren't great journal keepers, so we don't know. But a cabin like this with a wood floor, coming as early as they did, they would have been very glad to have a place this nice.
Yeah, and with 3 kids by the end of that year, it would have been a suitable house, because we got a loft upstairs for sleeping, and so it's very serviceable. Like Tom was mentioning earlier, it's probably 2 or 3 logs shorter than it originally was, just because we were short of logs on the bottom. We had to use the top logs to the bottom, sort of thing. You want to talk a little bit, Tom? We won't go into too much, because when it whet their appetite, have them come out to the site and see how you interpret it. But
Betcha.
you want to talk a little bit about maybe a little basic interpretation of what happened at the site?
The Native Americans, they didn't trap or collect fur except when they needed it to make clothing. Beaver fur was very well used to make robes, to keep warm in the wintertime. You take a half a dozen good-sized beaver hides, sew them together, and you make kind of a robe, a blanket with it, with the hair on the inside.
We do the opposite.
Exactly. We're really dumb.
Yes.
Although I do know of a Native American lady who had a point blanket, a wool blanket, lined in mink fur. Her husband bought it for a significant wedding anniversary.
Right.
Woman couldn't wear it unless it was below 0, because it was so warm. But they would wear it with the hair on the inside, and the skin on the outside would then shed water and whatever. When they were introduced to the fur trade, and this is in the 1600s, in that 1650 to 17 or whatever, they were encouraged to hunt beaver and to dry the hide and then bring it in to trade for things that they wanted to use.
What type of trade goods would they be looking for that they didn't have access to?
Wool blankets were a big step up from leather, because if it gets wet, you can dry a wool blanket even in the wintertime, and it works.
Any kind of metal, I imagine.
Any kind of metal, spears, axes, knives, files, chisels, any of that stuff. Guns with gunpowder, that sort of things. Kettles. They cooked in wood and birch bark and other skins. Some of them used clay. There's some more than others, let's put it that way, depending on what they had to use. And but when they could cook in a metal pail, metal container. Now we think of cast iron as the frontier thing, but not really. A brass or copper, what we would think of as a pail, was the first thing. It was light, was easy to cook on. You could put it over a fire and
it heated up quickly.
Heated up
Cast iron is wonderful, but it takes forever to heat.
Forever, and it's heavy to lug around.
Yes.
The Native Americans moved from time to time during the year to take advantage of the hunting, of the fishing, maple syrup gathering, this whole garden thing.
Sturgeon run.
Oh yeah, and I mean they were great gardeners. The Ho-Chunk people that lived in the area here, some of the very first raised bed gardens that they found in the state are not that terribly far south of us, near Baraboo, where they did raised bed gardening long before it was thought of anywhere else. So they traveled around, and lugging a cast iron kettle from one place to another was just not, where you could take a small child and they could carry a metal pail that was empty on a trek for a day or so. I mean, plenty easy enough for even a small child to carry.
3, 4, or 5 pounds.
Yeah, they could carry it easily. So I mean, the big thing was the cooking kettles. From what I've read, excuse me. From what I've read, 80 to 85% of what they traded for was everyday domestic stuff.
Now, would they trade for such things as, say, needles?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Because they were probably using some antler or some porcupine quills or something for in place of
or a small bone, that they would use for an awl, and then use a needle.
But you can imagine the time it took to achieve that.
Yeah, needles and thimbles was another thing. That was a big deal because of the metal needle. Yeah, going through leather.
Yeah.
Even fine leather, fairly thin. Needles, a thimble, were a big trade item.
Tom, will you talk about, now when you interpret here in the trader's cabin, you interpret as not a voyager that was moving, you were,
correct.
What, a havernaut?
Yeah. I kind of, because I can't help it, I am kind of the retired voyageur. I mean, let's face it, I fit the part. So many times when the physical work of being a voyageur, going back and forth to Montreal each summer, got to be too much, then maybe sometimes they would become an hivernaut, a winterer, and they would stay here. They may travel some yet, going to meet and be resupplied. I would imagine we would go to Green Bay from here. That was a major training center since the time of the American Revolution. But we might travel that far, but not the grueling 8 weeks out,
all the way
8 weeks back, the whole bit. So we would live here. Many times, well, the gentleman that I use for my touchstone to tell stories with came to Lac du Flambeau in 1795, married a woman from the Lac du Flambeau band in 98, and they both worked in the fur trade the rest of their lives, but he was not a voyageur. He was a trader and an interpreter and that sort of different jobs. In fact, she did also, which was kind of unusual.
Yes.
There's some records of that.
And you've said a number of times, at least I've heard you say a number of times, that you didn't pick the character picked you.
He picked me. I was looking, when we first started, after the third year, so we're talking, what, 89, 90?
Yeah.
when we were going to do our festival, we were advised to create our own living history people. You took on Mr. Wakely, Marianne took on Mrs. Wakely, there was a bunch of others. I was looking for someone to do the fur trade. I don't know why I was drawn to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I went to the library and I got out the history of Wood County, and you're reading, and one of Wakely's contemporaries was Pierre Charette. Yeah. And I didn't want to jump right on top of him, so I said, I'll be Pierre. I'll be more French than he was. No, he was Pierre. That was my problem. And like I always say, I don't know that I chose him or he chose me, but we have been together now 30 some years.
Yeah, and the Pierre was kind of interesting in the connection with Robert Wakely is they signed the petition for the post office to be at Point Basse. Did he sign it both times or just once?
I've seen it once. I was told he did twice, but I've not seen
We've
the
got
first
one of the copies of the signatures on there, and it's from one of the times. I can't remember which one.
I think the second one, because the first one was lost in the mail, if you can imagine.
You're trying to get a post office and it gets lost in the mail trying to get the post office.
Right.
So he did it twice. So Jim will just show you around the cabin a little bit, and then we're going to catch up with you. We're going to take a little walk along the trail, so we'll see us shortly. You want to just scan a little bit around the room if you want, Jim, and then you can go outside and do a little bit if you want. And then we'll lock up and we'll go do a little trails. Take a little tour on our trail system here. As many of you may or may not know, we have quite an extensive trail system. Originally developed by Eric Berryman as, I believe, a Eagle Scout project.
I believe so.
And Matt Hazel had just recently redone it about a year ago. And so we've got a nice trail system up here. A few new features of our trail system is we have some different markers. This one is about the blue jay, and they're colored, and we got the money through the Audubon Society. They provided the money for it, and it was a Girl Scout project, a senior Girl Scout project, to put these in and paint the posts and mount this. So it's kind of a nice thing. We have trail markers with numbers on it that denote certain features, physical features on the site, but these are like in between, so it kind of gives you a nice a route to something else to see as you go along on the trail. Speaking of trail, it's a good segue. Our Spirit Walk is on October 19th and 26th this year. That's our haunted history. That's one of our, I guess, Tom, one of our biggest events almost, really.
One of our favorite ones too, to be honest with you.
We normally have about 8 different spirits, 8 different groups of spirits on the route, and you walk along the trails, and it's led by somebody with a kerosene or a candle lantern, and then they have a tail guide that's on the back end so we don't lose anybody. And they take off from our shelter, which is just north of the schoolhouse, and they walk around the site. It costs $5 for adults and $2 for students, and it's on October 19th, which are Saturdays, and then October 26th. It starts at 6 o'clock. If you want to come out, if you got small children, or maybe you're not familiar with the terrain, or maybe you have a little problem walking around a little bit because of uneven terrain, we suggest you come out the early ones because it's nice and flat and nice. You can see where you're going and the children and everything. It's haunted history. It isn't anything scary where anybody's going to grab you or anything like that, but it's from 6. The last group goes out about 8:30, so approximately about 9:15 is when the event ends. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to go around with the group. So it's all led, and then they go from different spirits to different spirits, and they tell you the story of their life, which is kind of nice. It has a real historical bent to it, so that you get a little history at the same time. You're getting a nice evening walk in Halloween time, so it's kind of nice that way. So October 19th and 26th. Saturdays in October, so those 2 Saturdays, so take advantage of it. It's a real crowd pleaser. So now we're going to just walk down the trail a little bit, and we're going to just do a little small segment of it just to see what you can see. Now about a year ago, we had some logging done here on our site. We have approximately about 38 acres. And we had some logging. We had some trees that were way into maturity, and popples and different things like that had to be taken out, some maples and oaks and that sort of thing. But you can see some of it's been thinned out here, but there's still a lot of trees here. We're right about in the middle of our site. right about in the, I would say almost the middle, because if you go out to County Trunk Z, I think you'd be about as far as if you went to the river from this point and into the suburb or to Wakely Road here. So we're right in about the middle of it. Yeah, the trail's all been kind of mowed, and it's got chips and shavings and things on the trail. And here we got one marker right over here, which is number 3. So that's number 3 marker. And when the booklets are completed, it'll denote something of importance in the environment here that's important, and the 3 will be denoted that way. And here we can see right off to our right here is what here we call what widowmaker.
Widowmakers, correct.
It's that tree that is broke off, I suppose, during that sheer wind we had. It's broke off and it's hung up in the limbs of that white pine there. So that's the ones that they used to talk about years ago. If some of those would fall and then the people would be working underneath it, well, a lot of times it would certainly kill the person, and that's why they call them widowmaker. And we almost made our own widowmaker, as Tom was recalling how we hoisted up some of those beams in the trader's cabin. Those were widowmakers we didn't realize at the time, though. You can see we got some large white pines here.
That's red pine. Oh, white pine over there.
White
okay.
Pine and
I'm sorry.
White pines intermixed in here. And in the distance. And right below us, we'll see the kind of the remnants, or the end where the Wakely Creek takes the dog leg towards the Wisconsin River. That big tree that the eagle was in went down.
It went down? Well, that ain't our fault.
Here's another bird of Point Basse. This is a black-capped chickadee, and the Girl Scouts that worked on this project they had the choice. I think each of them picked out like 6 birds or something that they had a choice of picking out based on what was here. So kind of nice, beautiful signs that are supposed to be pretty resistant to weather and everything, should last for many, many years. So thanks to the Audubon Society and the Girl Scouts. As many of you folks had, is we had some sheer wind damage down here too. Nakusa had a lot less than we had in the Wisconsin Rapids area, but about a week ago we took out some of those trees that were dropped across the trail, some fairly large ones, and so we've been working on the trail just kind of clean it up a little bit, because we had a number of those trees down on our trail like you did at your own home. And on the right here we got the number 19, so that would denote that in the book that's will be made for the trails, and number 19 would relate to some physical feature here at this point.
Kind of a tree or whatever,
or whatever it might be. And this is our next bird. It's a great horned owl, and of course we have those owls down here.
Yes, we do.
Once in a while. And a lot of times we think of owls as in the evening, but we hear them, I don't know if they're doing mating calls or what they're doing, but we hear them during the daytime too.
Well, and the barred owl, which is different than that one, we have several of those down here, and they are more active during the day than the great horn.
Horned owl. And then if Jim will just shoot over towards the Wakely Creek here, you can see it through the leaves and the trees here and everything. You can see the water in the background there. I don't know how it shows off on the camera, but you can see the river right now, because of the rains in the last few days, is fairly high, so the creek is getting actually dammed up. It's making it a lake effect almost. Beautiful on the trail here. We got the sun coming through, and the dappled sunlight through the foliage here is really nice. And these trails are open all year round if you wanted to come down and snowshoe or cross-country ski. They're not groomed or anything, but you certainly are welcome to come here. And here's the number 20 on the trail guide that would correspond with that. And here off to our left here, you can actually see the creek is up fairly close to us. It's probably 12, 15 feet away from us. Wakely Creek isn't a really long creek. It starts in the cranberry marshes to the east and north of us a little bit, but runs into the Wisconsin River here. What do you think, Tom? Maybe a mile, 2 miles?
No more than 2, I wouldn't think.
About 2 miles long, probably.
Many of you might remember Doc Pomainville.
Yes.
And they said when they were kids, he and his brothers would come down and pick watercress in the Wakely Creek at that time. Now, there was no cranberry marsh there at the time.
So it had to be very fresh water.
Yes, and there was no Petenwell Dam, so it was a fast-flowing small creek. But they used to come and pick watercress to sell.
And I think at one time it actually had pretty good, it was pretty good trout stream, I think, at one time.
I've heard that. I don't know that, but I heard it.
Our next bird of Point Basse is the red-winged blackbird, which is very prevalent here. They got a very distinctive call.
That's the first sign of spring.
Yes.
That always makes me feel good when you hear them in the spring.
There's one here too.
A leaner?
Probably should take this out.
Yeah.
Spirit water.
Yeah. Hope it wasn't donating, that number 1 wasn't denoting a red pine tree.
Yeah, and then we got number 1 post here. So this is kind of where it starts. And we kind of went kind of reverse order here. You can see another widowmaker here. There's I think it looked like pretty much a dead red pine that fell over and is hung up in this, I don't know if this is ash or what it is over here.
Yeah, I think so. Oak tree, excuse me.
So I'd like to thank you for Tom for being with us today on Historic Point Basse Update, and thanks to all you out there listening, and we'll see you next month. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon to everybody in TV land. This is Mike Hittner with Historic Point Basse Update. And today with me, Larry Knutson. Larry, welcome.
Good day. Beautiful, beautiful day today.
We've got the October 9th, probably the last really nice day we're probably going to have this fall. We'll have some probably nice days, but it's about 70 degrees, sun shining, and it looks downhill from here Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we're filming out at the site, and that's kind of exciting for us. We've been doing that, as you noticed, probably the last 3 times. So started, I think, at the blacksmith shop at that time. But we're going to talk a little bit about our next event, which is our Spirit Walk. It's October 19th, it's a Saturday, and October 26th, 2 Saturdays. It starts at 6 p.m. and last group goes out at 8:30 p.m. Now, it's a lot of fun, and it's for us participants, both as characters and guides, and Larry and I have both been over the years. It's a lot of fun, both on your side as a person coming through, as a person participating, and also for us that are citizens that are doing portrayals or doing the guiding, that sort of thing. And it's $5 for adults, $2 for students. Just as a suggestion for you now, if still a little light out at 6 o'clock yet, so if anybody has a little trouble with uneven terrain, which we have here, uneven terrain or darkness and stuff like that, come out at early, 6:30, and get around. It takes about 45 to 50 minutes to go around. You're guided by somebody that will be your guide with either a candle lantern or kerosene lantern. Usually have a tail guide on the back, or we'll pick one of the people in the group to be a tail guide. Normally the groups they try to keep are 10, 12, maybe 14 or so. Try to keep them a little smaller, because some places, I know Larry and I have both been in buildings over the years, sometimes you get so many people it's hard to get them all in to know exactly when they're all in there to start your presentation or whatever. But it's haunted history. It's nothing scary. Nobody's going to grab you or reach out for you, or no slime or anything like that. So it's good old-fashioned stories about some of the characters that used to be here, some of the characters that were of the same time period, and some stories of what might have happened in those days. So some of them are a little sad, where somebody passes away or somebody drowns or something like that. But most of them are just stories of life as they were in the 1800s. So if you get a chance, come on out. And Larry, you've both done a character and guided. I know you like both of them, but tell us a little bit about maybe your character when you were doing it, because you usually do a Norwegian immigrant or something like that.
Yeah, my portrayal at Point Basse throughout the year is more of a Norwegian immigrant that came to Wisconsin to settle and work in the logging camps and stuff. So I kind of stick with that theme, if you will, and stuff. So like last year I was a Norwegian spirit, Norwegian immigrant that died here and was looking to guide other people coming.
Yeah, you're probably hoping, if everything went according to the way you'd hoped, you'd bring the family over and everybody else, and they could join you. But sometimes, as we know, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, things happen. So,
Yes.
but as Mike said, this is more for history and entertainment. It's not to be scared the bejeebers out of you, so I think a lot of people like that. It's something a little bit unique for Halloween. Also, being a guide, the thing when you're one of the spirits, you are locked into where you're located, so you don't get to see the other spirits, which is kind of bad for us people that are spirits.
Yeah,
so when you're a guide, this year I'm volunteering for a guide, because then I get to see all the spirits as well.
That's kind of fun.
That's the benefit.
The only time as a spirit that you get to see the other spirits is if you happen to be the first one. Then sometimes you can trail along with the group and
the last one. Right?
And just kind of follow around. But
I think all our people that volunteer here, we have people that volunteer year after year after year as to be spirits and guides and stuff, because they enjoy it so much. We have so many people that come to enjoy our spirit walk year after year after year. And so it's something that don't come once, come at least twice, because you're going to see something every year.
Well, and what's nice about it too is we rotate. If you're going to hear a similar story, it's probably was done 3 or 4 years ago.
Right.
You're not going to hear anything that was done last year. And the nice part about it too is each little vignette, each little thing the spirits talk about is from 3 to 5 minutes, so you're never too long in one spot, then you're on to the next spot. And generally we have about 8 stations, so 5 minutes, that'd be 40 minutes plus walking time in between, so figure about 50 to 60 minutes probably for going around the whole site. It's led by, like I said to begin with, a guide that is either carrying a candle lantern or a kerosene lantern, and you're kind of guided, and they'll prep you a little bit, I've got some information here about the spirits this year. And just to give you a little snippet of what's going to happen, so it kind of prepares you. Otherwise, sometimes you're halfway through the thing before you realize what's going on. And we've had it in the past, and I'm sure this year too. Some people come out and they like it so much that next week they bring some other family members or friends, and they come out the next week. I've seen that in the years that I've been a spirit, probably 4 or 5 times I think we've probably done this 12 or 14 years now. But it's a lot of fun for you, and it's a lot of fun for us. October 19th and October 26th, 2 Saturdays, the 2 last Saturdays of the month, and it'll be from 6:30, the first group goes out, and until 8:30, the last group goes out. We've got hot apple cider for you, we've got some water, we got storytellers around a bonfire so that you can enjoy your time. Because a lot of times we get an influx of people, let's say at 7:15, 7:30. Well, we maybe have 2 or 3 groups there, and we kind of got to work through until the next group is through, and then the next guide shows up, and that group goes out. We stagger them about 10 minutes apart usually. We try to keep them about 10 minutes apart so they don't bump in and catch up to each other.
It's sometimes a challenger for the people that are gate people there, because sometimes we have some very large families that come out here, and we certainly want to have them to go together and stuff, so they have to kind of coordinate, how many we get out.
Yeah, and sometimes they'd like a little smaller group, but I remember, I was with Carl Johnson while Carl was alive, and I was down by the river. Carl and I were doing a thing together down by the river. That's when we used to take him down, and that was a dangerous thing anyway, that path down by the river. And the people kept coming and coming. I think there was over 20 people in that group, and we were outside, so there wasn't any issue, but I kept watching them walk down the hill, and I thought, well, that's it. And then there's more people coming down the hill. It was a huge group. But let me go through a few of the vignettes that we're going to have this year. In the house, Mary Wakely is revisiting her spiritualism, because to understand the happenings in her life. She had a lot of tragedy in her life, and because of losing a child and that sort of thing, and so she's kind of revisiting those things and probably seeing some of those things in her life. In the prairie area, a pioneer will discuss the use and importance of black powder. Black powder was a huge thing, and it kind of revolutionized everything, and there'll be a pioneer that'll be right in the prairie area. In the cabins on the 26th, we'll have a voyageur. The 19th he's not available, but on the 26th that cabin will be there. In the fire circle, we got a couple gentlemen. They're trying to make a little hooch out there, and they're trying to distill some spirits, and they're going to have a story about doing that. Bunkhouse, an assistant to an itinerant peddler is staying there in the bunkhouse, and he tells his story, how going around with this professor and selling, door to door or town to town, what we used to call anyway is snake oil salesman. And in the blacksmith shop, the best thing in a community like the Wakeleys had in the 1840s through 1860s, and the person that was the most needed was a blacksmith, because he could fix anything. I mean, everything from pulling teeth to, blacksmiths pulled teeth in those days, from pulling teeth to fixing anything that had metal to do with it, he could do it. Well, a lot of times, if you got a really good blacksmith, it looks easy, but we all know it isn't that easy. And by the bridge, we got the witches this year. The witches are down by the bridge, and they usually bring a lot of fun and laughter and shrieking. And usually I can hear them if you're guiding this year, Larry, you'll hear them laughing when you go across the bridge from a group that's already going past them there. And behind the school, many characters in the early years of logging and lumbering were frontier, either saints or sinners. So this is going to be about some of those saints and sinners during the logging and in the lumbering years, in the early years, like when the Wakeleys were here. In the school, we got a young lady that's going to be telling the story of her encounter with Abraham Lincoln. So it'll be kind of interesting. It's kind of sort of thing that if you had somebody that had an encounter with Abraham Lincoln in life, they might come back, especially after he was assassinated, probably come back and even give a talk at a school for the school kids and maybe even the the family members of it. So Spirit Walk, October 19th and October 26th, 6 o'clock p.m. we start touring. 8:30 p.m. is the last group go out. $5 for adult, $2 for students, right here at the Wakely site. So you get your tickets right in the parking lot area by the picnic shelter there. Apple cider's free and available to you, and there's storytelling around the bonfire by where you're waiting for your guides to take you out. And so come on out and enjoy that. You'll enjoy it. Thanks, Larry, for joining me.
Thank you. Beautiful day.
Okay, now we want to go around. Larry, you know most of this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. Larry, why don't you go through more? Why don't I tell them a little history of the barn, and then you go through the barn.
That I don't know that much. So.
Okay, we're at the barn. We're filming at our barn here at the Wakely site. About 24 feet by about 30 feet. Seems like all our buildings are about 24 by 30 around here, or close to those dimensions. I guess it must have been the limitations that they had in those days. This is a barn that we originally took down and took apart at Bob and Joy Hess's farm. They were taking down a building, putting up a new building, so Tom and Carl Johnson and I went out and checked it out, and it seemed good out there. So we took it down in the fall, and a bunch of the tractor guys helped us haul it into town. Bob Hess also helped take it down at the site. And so we took it down and brought it here, and then found out the next spring when we started to put it up that it was really too rotted to use. I mean, we kind of thought, well, we'd have to replace a few logs, but it was too rotted to use. So we, in the meantime, in the fall, had built the foundation for it, so we were kind of stuck with the dimensions of the original Hess barn. So this one was a little bit of ingenuity. I thought to myself, well, this looks like telephone poles could make this. So I contacted Solaris, and Solaris said we could have a bunch of telephone poles. They were taken down in County Trunk Z about the same time we were looking for them. So Solaris says, we'll drop them off there for you. Oh, nice, nice. Comes to find out later that those were all Alliance poles, and Solaris was giving them away. But we called up Alliant and asked them, would you want them back? And they said, no, we don't want them back. For your folks' information, telephone poles, if they're by or on your property, you get first right of refusal on those. If not, then they either sell them or they haul them back to the boneyard or a scrapyard. So Pat Roosh came and helped us because he had built a log house, and they made the saddle arches on the logs, and we set them in there. And about 2 years to build it. It's got a hay mow upstairs here, and it's got a door out front where they can get the hay. The chinking was all done as a project of Eagle Scout project, as most of our chinking was done on the site, the cabin and different buildings, the warehouse. So this was chinked by Eagle Scout project, but it serves very well. And the Wakeleys would have had a barn. Now, did they have a lot of animals? The census figures talk about a couple cows and a couple oxen and maybe a couple horses and a few pigs and that. They didn't have a huge farm, but they all would have had a farm just for their wagon and pull their wagon and maybe plow the fields and do that sort of thing. So Larry is going to take you through and kind of talk to you about the materials and what's in the barn in the Wakely's day. So Larry, you want to take that over?
Okay, this is again, this is in the barn, and we've got some very interesting items in here for a lot of people that aren't familiar with the old days of farming. One of the more interesting items that I love in here are these little smiley faces that we have over on the wall over here. These are very interesting. They're very hard to find, and they're very appropriate to our region because they're what's called bog shoes. And what they are is because the lands around here were so boggy, a lot of people made these shoes. Now they would fit on the horses' feet like this, and they had caulks on their shoes, on their metal shoes that they're on the horses, and those caulks would fit in these depressions in the bog shoe here, and then this would simply clamp over their hoof over there, which gave them more flotation on the bog.
Larry, were they it looks to me like when you're showing those Bog Shoes that they're probably homemade. Were they probably homemade?
Oh, I'm sure they were homemade, and then metal, of course, was made by your local blacksmith and stuff. So now there's actually a picture, picture back in the 1600s in Holland with horses with Bog Shoes on. Now I believe the Bog Shoes were not as used to give the horses more flotation as they walked. It was actually to protect your hayfield, so your horses didn't leave huge indents in that hayfield that you had to deal with the next year. So we have a nice set of Bog Shoes here, which are, in my estimation, quite rare. Okay. Another item we have over here, we have a plow. And I find this plow, it is, in my terms, humongous. It is a very large plow from many years ago. I am not absolutely sure of just exactly what year it was used. But if you do come out to Point Basse, above the plow, you'll see a picture here that was given to us by the family that donated the plow. And that picture actually shows this exact plow being pulled by oxen, horses, and milk cows. So basically, if you had a plow like this, whatever animal you had on the farm, you utilized to do the plowing on the farm, because one or two horses would certainly not be able to pull this huge of a plow. And of course, we have our different yokes here that we have for different size oxen yokes. This is a single one here, of course, and of course your double yoke here. We have a couple other small items. We don't have a tremendous amount of farm items in there, but we've got different cultivators here and things like this. One other thing we have is this water yoke here, because they would have to carry water for the animals from down by the river, more than likely. And anybody that's raised animals, such as horses and cows and so on, they do take quite a bit of water. And sometimes during the winter, you want to haul water up. You don't want to take them down to the water because it's slippery and stuff. So you may use a water yoke like this. A little interesting tidbit on this here. If you notice these buckets are narrower on the top than on the bottom. And if you've ever hauled water, you would find out that if you have a container that's narrower on top and wider on the bottom, you have less spillage. You don't get that big heavy wake like that. So if you see a bucket built like that with a narrower top, it's because you don't have near as much spillage when you're going to be carrying water. When we have our school groups out here, we have a lot of school groups out here, second graders to fourth graders and so on. And we demonstrate to them the use of our machines here. And this one is a corn sheller. They would pick the corn, they would pick it by hand, and we do have a couple items here for husking the corn. They would take that, and then they would take the cob like this and they would throw it in a wagon. And they had a backboard on that wagon, and they would bounce off that wagon and off that backboard and into the wagon. And then they would bring it in, and then they would run it through their corn sheller. And you put a cob in here, and you turn the wheel. Oh, I spilled a lot of corn. Okay, I didn't realize I didn't have the basket. Okay, so we have corn comes out one there, and then the cob comes out in here. So that's how they would have to do all their corn if they wanted to use their corn for grinding. Now that was for cattle and for personal use, because if they ground the corn in a corn grinder, this is what they would put it in, and this is what you can make your cornmeal out of. You'd put your corn in here, and then you grind that, and then it would come out the bottom as a cornmeal. Okay. Now this is a coarse grinder, so it's not ground real fine in there. Some of the items that we have that were used on the farm, of course, everybody had axes, because the crosscut saw back in the 1840s was not used to fall a tree as much as an axe was. Falling a tree with a crosscut saw came later once the rake on the saw was invented. Then it was a lot easier to fall a tree. Okay. We have our horse harnesses here. We have our planters. This is a potato planter. You would take and poke that into the ground and drop your potato in there, and then you open it up and you'd go and plant your potato. This is a corn planter. If you went by hand, you'd take this and you'd put it in there. You take it down and you go like that, and you planted a kernel of corn. So you could plant your corn by hand. When I was young, teenager, I worked for a farmer, and I had to plant all the seeds in a row that his planter missed. So I had a lot of walking to do. Of course, we have a harness out here for the horses. We've got our feed bin in here where they would have kept feed for the grain and that for the horses and the cows. We have a manger and area set up back there. That's more than likely where the horses would be stabled. And above the manger, there's a hole in there where they would have tossed down the hay to feed the horses and the other animals in there. And this open area here, actually in practical use, they probably would have had a couple stalls out here for the cows as well, so they could milk the cows. Although a lot of cows years and years ago, during the winter you would milk them in the barn, but during the summer you wouldn't even milk them in the barn. You would just go out in the pasture and the cow would stand there, and the ladies of the house would milk the cows, because that was typically a lady's job back in that era. We have needs a little repair here, but we have a scion cradle, and this is for when you're cutting wheat and you want to catch that wheat. When you cut it with a scythe, that wheat would lay in that cradle, and when you're really good at this, you could take a swing with that and then you would kind of like dump it, and it would come and it would fill that cradle, and then you could take and bind it. And then I don't know if anybody's ever seen this. It's hard to see. So you see it a little bit in the Amish community today, where you've got your corn shocks out there standing in the field drying, because they had to dry it before they could remove the seeds from the stalks on there. You notice this is a quite wide blade on here, and that would be for like cutting wheat. This sickle here, this has got a much narrower blade. Now, a lot of it's because it's been sharpened so many times. This would have been a little wider, but it's been sharpened so many times that the blade ended up being narrow. But this could be, again, for grains and or just taking care of weeds and things around your home. We have two kinds of sickles here. If you notice this one, it's smooth on the edge where it's sharpened. And this one is kind of serrated on the edge where it's sharpened. And the purpose for that is for two different purposes. This is for grasses, such as wheat and grass and so on. This one is more for corn, when you harvest corn stalks. And if you ever get an opportunity to use these, you would say there isn't that much difference. But if you go and try and cut a corn stalk with this one cuts it so much easier and quicker, and vice versa. If you would try and cut grass with this one, it kind of hangs up in that serration in there. So they're pretty ingenious in figuring out what to use to cut different things back in that era. A tool that was used on many, many homesteads is this item here. It's a grub hole, they call it. Now, this is used for many different things, but mainly if you had some hard dirt and you needed to dig a hole or something, or break up dirt, you would use a grub hole like this. Used a lot when you're building your homestead. They're pretty important. And then you had another one like this. It's called a Mattock. And it's similarly used, but it's got a little bit of an axe thing on here. So a good thing about this is if you get some stubborn root of a big elm tree or oak tree or something, you could cut that root with the axe part here, and then continue your grubbing with the grub part here. So that's with most of the items that are in the barn. Another thing that we have out here that I can't get that one off. This item up here, it's a little rare to find. That's an ox shoe. Okay, a lot of people don't know. They used oxen to log in logging camps during the winter. And when they logged during the winter, they would build ice roads. And in order for those oxen to pull those big loads of logs through the ice, they had to shoe them. Now this is 1/2 because, of course, the oxen with the cloven hoof, or the 2 hooves, they needed one for the other side as well. But they actually shod their oxen, which a lot of people don't realize, plus to protect their feet, just like you shoe a horse. They protects their feet as well.
It's my understanding, Larry, on the oxen, now the farmers had options, certainly. They had both choice of oxen or horses, but the oxen, with the benefit was they didn't have to have the specialized grain and feed, and they weren't so particular, where a horse, the oxen could eat it just in the ditch banks and they'd be happy and get enough fulfillment, but the horses had to have probably some oats and they had to have some pretty good hay.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with oxen is actually horses you have to rest a fair amount when you're working them. Oxen, they're a little bit slower when they're pulling a plow and things like that, but they can go a long time without a rest versus the horses. So oxen were actually a preferred animal to many farmers, and the horses were more of a specialty animal, I guess. If you notice, too, just a little sidebar, with the barn here, a lot of times you're driving around the country and out in the middle of a field, you will see a big tree out there, great big old oak or an elm tree or something like that, and you kind of wonder, why is that tree there? A lot of farmers, when they were settling, left trees purposely out in their fields like that, because when they were out farming their fields during the day and they wanted to give their oxen or their horse a rest, they didn't want to take them all the way back to the homestead to give them a rest, so they left a tree out there for shade, so that when you're going to give them a rest, you could take your animal over to that shade tree and give them a nice rest in the shade. And then, of course, when Mama brought lunch out there for you, you and Mama could sit in the shade too, along with your oxen or horses out there. And of course, a lot of people that have had horses, you need different types of horse bits that goes in their mouth, okay, depending on the horse you had, okay. This one looks kind of rough, and that's because this would have been used on a horse that you would call had a hard mouth. And a hard mouth horse is one that they will sometimes be real hard to turn or whatever, so you had a little coarser bit on them to make them behave. And then some of them, of course, all you needed was a little bar to go across, so that depended on the horse. So each style was a little different depending on the animal themselves, because everybody knows animals have personalities as well. So, okay.